Imagine your team drawing a game for a place in the final, and, to decide who passes, the judge simply has the idea of taking a coin out of his pocket and saying a coin toss right there. That's exactly what happened in one edition of the European Championship. This story borders on the unbelievable for us today, but in 1968, in Italy, the host team faced the Soviet Union in the semifinal, and the Italians spent practically the entire game with one less because a player was injured. Believe it or not, at that time there were no substitutions yet. Italy had 10 on the field, held at 0-0, and took it to extra time. In extra time, another player was injured and, as there were no substitutions, he left the field and Italy was left with 9. The extension is over. Now, who will go to the final? Will it be decided on penalties? What, nothing? The referee called the two captains into the dressing room, out of sight of the fans, and decided on a Euro Cup finalist with a coin toss. Italian captain Facchetti chose tails and won, returning from the dressing room to the field jumping with joy. That's how the fans found out that Italy had qualified. Afterwards, the Italians still won the European Championship, winning a title that, in large part, was due to luck. This bizarreness caused IFAB, the international body that dictates the rules of football, to change things and introduce penalty shootouts in 1970. You see, not so long ago, football was chaos. And speaking of chaos, another bizarre thing that happened at the Euro Cup was the silver goal rule. You may have heard of the golden goal rule. When extra time went to the team that scored the first goal, it won the game and ended there. But did you know that IFAB, at some point, thought it would be a good idea to create a brother to the golden goal, the silver goal? It was more or less like this. If the teams tied, the game would go into extra time. If a goal was scored in the first half of extra time, the game would not end immediately after the goal, but when it reached the interval between the first and second half of extra time, then the game would end. It would not be necessary to play the second half. Just by explaining it, you can already see that the rule is not only confusing but also takes away that emotion that supposedly existed in the golden goal. The only big game that used this rule was in a Euro Cup semi-final in 2004, when Greece eliminated the Czech Republic in the silver goal. From then on, for the good of everyone, this bizarreness was abolished, and we reached the format we know today, with normal extra time and, later, penalties. It can also be contested, as most overtimes usually have both teams tired, with little emotion. We've already had a silver goal and a golden goal. The only thing missing was the bronze one. Jokes aside, it's curious how the history of the European Championship is confused with the history of football rules. There is another bizarre thing that happened in 1992, which was neither silver, nor gold, nor bronze. It was actually brass. Denmark was one of the big surprises of the 1992 Euro Cup, almost falling in the group stage, but turning around at the end against France and going to the knockout stage, which at that time was straight to the semi-final. They drew with the Netherlands, went through on penalties, and went to the final against Germany, who were the current world champions. Denmark went there and scored 2-0 in a match that was marked by a historic wax. Basically, Denmark's strategy was as follows. When they were in front of the scoreboard, the players passed the ball back to Schmeichel, who was the goalkeeper, and he caught the ball with his hand, because at that time it was still allowed. He would put the ball in play again. The guys would return the ball to him again, and so they would waste time. They messed up so much in this final that the IFAB decided to change the rules once again, prohibiting the goalkeeper from catching an intentional setback with his hand. If a goalkeeper like Ederson is valued in the market today because he is good with his feet, you can be sure that part of this is because back then Denmark made a mistake in a Euro final. We are in a bizarre video, and Denmark did one. But there is another because they won this Euro Cup without qualifying. Exactly, in the qualifiers for the 1992 Euro, Denmark was behind Yugoslavia and was eliminated. They would not go to the Euro. However, at that time, there were conflicts within Yugoslavia, and UEFA decided to ban the Yugoslavs from competitions. Denmark, which was second in the qualifying group, inherited the place from the Yugoslavs. They won a place out of nowhere, were grateful, spent time and waxed in every game, and even went home with the championship cup. Speaking of rules involving goalkeepers, I ask, is it mandatory for a goalkeeper to wear gloves when playing? No, it is not mandatory. It was precisely during a European Championship that a goalkeeper decided to take off his gloves in an absolutely dramatic moment. It was our beloved Euro 2004, when England faced hosts Portugal in the quarterfinals. After extra time, the game went to penalties with no coin toss this time. Okay, the teams were taking their penalties until it was time for Darius Vassell, the Englishman. The Portuguese goalkeeper at that moment was Ricardo, who had not saved any kicks until then. He thought, what could I do to give myself extra motivation and also destabilize the opposing kicker? Then he had an idea. What if I take off the gloves? He took it out and threw it away. Imagine you, a striker, prepared, and suddenly you see the goalkeeper taking off his gloves as if to say, I don't even need gloves to take your penalty. I don't know if Vassell was nervous or not, but Ricardo jumped very well and saved the Englishman's penalty with his bare hands. As we are in a weird video, I promise there will be a lot more until the end. The next penalty was for Portugal to beat. Guess who went to charge? Exactly, goalkeeper Ricardo, with his bare hands. He hit too well and qualified Portugal for the semi-finals, deciding to take the penalty without a glove and taking it perfectly. Imagine if fashion catches on and an attacker decides to destabilize the goalkeeper by taking off his boot when taking the penalty. In fact, you can't, as there is a rule that the player has to have shoes on. But we looked at the IFAB rules, and the following is written there. Rule number 4, article number 2. Mandatory equipment, footwear. Nobody talks about boots. So, there is room for a player to make a joke like that. Imagine the Euro Cup final. The time comes for Cristiano Ronaldo to take the decisive penalty, and he decides to take off his football boots and put on a Hello Kitty slipper to provoke the opposing goalkeeper. Well, I support it, and the judge couldn't do anything. Ronaldo could wear Hello Kitty slippers and still take the rules of football with him if the judge tried to piss him off. I'd like to see this happen. And what's worse, it wouldn't even be the biggest bizarre thing about a Euro Cup, okay? Especially because, speaking of Cristiano Ronaldo, a really cool thing happened to him in 2016. An insect fell in love with the guy before the final between Portugal and France. Apparently, staff at the Stade de France, where the final was played, forgot to have the lights on the night before the final. You know, lights on at night, especially in summer, attract all kinds of flying animals, mosquitoes, and so on. At the time of the final, the stadium was full of moths. Remember when, in the first half, Cristiano Ronaldo fell to the ground injured? Well, the camera focused on him and he wasn't alone, because a little moth landed right on his face and ended up earning his 15 minutes of fame on top of the CR7. Imagine he opens his mouth and the animal accidentally lands in the middle of his tongue? It would be a funny moment. Speaking of free, all the videos we make like this, more relaxed, telling funny stories, a character that you already know always appears, our dear Balotelli. He appeared very well in the 2012 Euro Cup, in a semi-final against Germany in which he scored 2 goals, the second a great goal. But instead of going out celebrating, as you well know, he stood still in a superhero pose, as if to say, I do this every day. If Balotelli is a superhero, the European Championship already had a villain called Oliver Kahn. At Euro 2000, he was the best goalkeeper in the world, but made a bizarre mistake against Portugal. End of the game, he picks up the ball and, instead of throwing it with his hands, he kicked it straight into midfield, but hit a Portuguese player. He ended up scoring the goal from Sergio Conceição. Another oddity came from Luis Enrique at Euro 1996. He left the field to use the bathroom and returned in time to score the winning goal for Spain against Bulgaria. And the referee didn't even notice. He could have been considered uneducated for running off the field like that, but he ended up being a hero. Imagine your team drawing a game for a place in the final and, to decide who passes, the judge simply has the idea of taking a coin out of his pocket and saying a coin toss right there. That's exactly what happened in one edition of the European Championship. This story borders on the unbelievable for us today, but in 1968, in Italy, the host team faced the Soviet Union in the semifinal, and the Italians spent practically the entire game with one less because a player was injured. Believe it or not, at that time there were no substitutions yet. Italy had 10 on the field, held at 0-0, and took it to extra time. In extra time, another player was injured and, as there were no substitutions, he left the field and Italy was left with 9.